We've got about 44 folks on. Summer is on top of the recording here. Thanks, Summer.
Sure.
So we'll get started here. For those of you that have just joined us, I was having folks drop in the chat their various uses of PowerPoint, and it seems that we've got a wide variety of use of PowerPoint here in the organization. Anything from flyers and marketing materials to social media posts and video presentations, lecture presentations, face-to-face presentations, and I'm sure. So today's digital accessibility training series will cover elements that are helpful to all of these things. So we'll get started with some introductions. I'm Amy Komicher. I'm an instructional development specialist with the Learning and Organizational Development Unit in Extension. Summer?
And yes, and I am an instructional aid associate or instructional designer. I work with Amy in LOD.
So that's who we are. And as I talked about, today's PowerPoint session will cover a lot of aspects of digital accessibility that apply to various uses of PowerPoint. And we'll get started by taking a step back a little bit to talk about why digital accessibility is important. And before we kind of dive into that, I am curious, how many of you were able to attend last week's Word and PDF digital accessibility session? I know some of you have asked about the recording, and we will get that distributed for folks. And I see the poll responses are flying in here. This is great. And thank you for whoever requested live transcription. I've got that turned on. We should have the closed captions up and running now if you want those. So we've got about 31 people were able to attend, and 13 said they couldn't quite make it, and that's absolutely fine. I just wanted to gauge kind of how far we should go with this overview here. And so we'll keep this overview at the front end here brief. But basically what digital accessibility is it is the usability of digital content for individuals with disabilities, and it impacts the way that they can perceive and use the content, and it is the strategy to design and build digital content to be as usable as possible to the most people as possible. And accessibility kind of extends to all spaces. So with digital accessibility, we talk about colors and screen readers and these things. And when we think about physical spaces and designing for the widest audience possible, you know, it really does improve the user experience for everybody. So we'll talk a little bit more about that with the why. So we create digital content to be accessible to benefit all users. And we want to maximize the way that that content can be consumed, and which, you know, broadens our reach and our impact. And additionally, it is the law and it is policy. That said, my favorite part about digital accessibility anyway is that when you improve the user experience by improving digital accessibility, you typically improve the user experience for everyone. Some classic examples of this are closed captions. Lots of folks use closed captions even if they don't technically need them. I think there was a statistic that came out from, I believe, BBC, that 80% of people who utilize closed captions are not hard of hearing or deaf. Personally, I like closed captions when my little kid is sleeping next to me on the couch and I don't want to wake her, but I still want to watch YouTube videos. The other thing, other examples in our environment would be curb cutouts. You know, they were designed for wheelchair users, but people with strollers or carts or just on a bike were able to use those. And Nora writes in the chat, I love closed captions because you can choose the language. Yes, adding the additional languages and subtitles is incredible. And I think it's wonderful. Another example of a accessible accommodation that was designed for wheelchair users, or someone who has a disability would be like a automatic button to open a door. And one of my favorite things about this example is it still improves the usability of that door for a lot of folks. If you're carrying in a big box of files, my kindergartner can barely open the school door. And so by giving her that button, she can independently open the door. Oh, and Elaine says, yes, have used those lots during COVID. Yeah, then you don't have to touch the door handle. So, just that simple act of adding that button improves the ability of folks to use that door independently. And that's kind of the same idea with digital accessibility. All people of all ages and all backgrounds really want to function independently. They want to consume our content without help. Nobody wants to have to ask for help to consume content or interact with our content. So by creating accessible content, we can provide the best foundation for everyone to be able to use our content independently. So we can keep going here. And Summer, you can go ahead and take over with the formatting. And as Summer gets this share screen pulled up, a couple other points I wanted to bring up is that when you take these steps that we're going to show you today to make digitally accessible content in, let's say, this PowerPoint, when you transition that to, say, PDF for a flyer, or you share it in your live presentation, you'll be well situated to have accessible content across the different areas of use for PowerPoint.
Yeah, and I just want to make a note before I get started here, I'm going to use this presentation to kind of show you some of the things in PowerPoint. I just want to say it might be easier if you don't try to follow along just yet and just kind of focus on what's going on the screen, because since this is being recorded, we will distribute it out to you later, and might be a little easier to get lost if you're following along as I'm going through it. But if you do have questions, go ahead and type them in the chat, and whoever's not presenting at the time will try to read them out or answer them. And Amy, definitely stop me if I'm missing anything as I go along. So there are a lot of similarities between Word and PowerPoint accessibility. If you were here last week for the Word and PDF accessibility training, but there are some differences. So if you were here last week for the Word and PDF training, we put a big focus on heading structure. PowerPoint does not use heading structure in the same way that Word does. So the main thing to focus on when you're building a new PowerPoint slide deck is using the preset slide layouts. So if you look up in the left-hand corner, whenever you're adding a new slide, and especially when we're using branded PowerPoint slide decks, which all of us, I think, should be using at least most of the time, these are set to be already accessible. So it is always best practice to select from the different slide types within the slide design. So you can find that in the new slide under the Home tab or under Insert New Slide. And this is where you'll add your title slides and the various different slide types, depending on that template that you're using. I will note that when you go into slide design, these types of presentation slide designs are not always accessible, and they also aren't on brand, so just to make that note. When you go into create new slides, so I'm going to go home, add a new slide. It is important that you always add a unique slide title to every slide. This is something that screen readers, if they're viewing the PowerPoint, they'll read the slide title, out for you, and every slide should have a unique slide title. So even if you are continuing information from one slide to the next, maybe put part 2 or continued to the end of your slide title on the next slide. This placeholder button for slide title, depending if you're using a template or not, may or may not already be there. If for some reason you accidentally delete that slide section, it is not sufficient to just double click to add a new text box or to add a new text box in the home menu, because that doesn't equate to a slide title, unfortunately, even if it's placed in the same spot. So if you happen to lose that slide title section and you've already got information in the body, you can just go up to layout in the home tab, the layouts button in the top left-hand corner. And in this section, depending on what template you're using, they may have different names. So you might have to look closely at the pictures of what they're showing, or the slide, slide title. If you click on one of those, it will keep the information that you have in the body, but add that title box back that will be read by a screen reader. So I'm just going to click around. So I originally had that one. And you do have to, I know it's really tiny text on screen, but that's just if you've lost your slide title, accidentally deleted it for some reason. If you have information on, or a slide title on your slide, information on your slide that you don't need to have a title to for whatever reason, whoops. What you can do is zoom out. So you can zoom out with this dial at the the right bottom screen, or you can do that with your mouse or trackpad. What you can do with your title is move it off screen so it's not showing on the slide, but when a screen reader reads through these slides, it will still read the title. And you can do that with other text information too, such as a transcript. If you have a complicated image on the screen, you don't want to have a text description of that image on the slide, you can move that off to the side, above or below the actual slide, and a screen reader will still read that information. All right, I'm gonna move that back to where it was. When you are using PowerPoint, Amy, are there any questions that I can address on that piece first before I move?
No, we've just got a little bit of chatter about branding, which I'm handling, so you can keep on going.
Okay, thank you. I saw there were quite a few comments, so I just wanted to double check.
I'm managing the chat unless I speak up, so.
All right,
continue.
Thank you. So when you are using PowerPoint for the purpose of presenting a presentation, a video presentation, or in-person presentation, we recommend using at least 18-point font so that the information is visible to the majority of users, and it's large enough essentially. However, if you're printing off something such as a flyer, then that is when it will be okay to, if you're printing it off on an 8x11 sheet of paper, to go with the default for Word, which is a minimum of 11-point font. So there's that difference there for how you're actually going to be using the PowerPoint slide. We also recommend sans serif fonts or our brand fonts, and then Arial is another good one to use. And then also paying attention to white space. You don't want to make your slide too crowded, and that's just generally a good design rule and also a good teaching and learning rule. You don't want to present too much information at a time so that things are not crowded and difficult to perceive. When it comes to color, this is another thing that's universal across anything, any presentation document type that you're going to use, Word, PDF, PowerPoint. You should always use appropriate color contrast for text and background colors. And in a minute, Amy's going to take over and show you an example of how you can test this. Because unlike with Word, Microsoft Word, PowerPoint does not always, in the accessibility checking feature, catch some of the color contrast issues like Word does. I want to show you this data visualization example, similar to what I showed you last week as well. Color should never be used as the only means of conveying any kind of information. So for the example on the left, I have a pie chart showing first quarter and second quarter sales. Most people, or I don't really know, I don't have other people's eyes, but I can tell the difference between the two colors in this pie chart. But these two colors may not have enough contrast for someone who is low vision or colorblind. And I would not be able to tell which is first and second quarter according to this key. On the right side, however, I have actually labeled, I've still used color to make something, you know, beautiful, but I've also labeled those individual sections with first quarter and second quarter sales. So once again, never use color as the only means of conveying any type of visual content or information. I think that, and Amy is going to, I'm going to stop my share and let Amy show you a tool, a WebAIM tool to use to check for color contrast. Since
Summer, before you shut that off, I just can't resist. I also want to point out that Summer's changes to this pie chart where the labels are over the top of the sections and we've removed the legend are some of the things that I've been learning about as far as improving data visualizations overall. So it's interesting to see the overlap of improving graphics, improving visuals for everyone, and digital accessibility in this space as well. So I just wanted to point that out because, you know, our data, our impact data matters. And so if we improve the usability for everybody, including our stakeholders who do the funding, you know, we're improving our chances to communicate our impacts and continue that funding in partnership with organizations. Sorry, couldn't help it. Data viz tangent.
I think that's great. Great to point
Okay.
out. And I'm going to go ahead and stop my share and let Amy show you how to use the contrast tool, since PowerPoint is not super great at actually detecting color contrast. So I'm going to stop my share.
And T asked, do you need to have the box around the info in the second example? I don't know if you necessarily need the box. I think the more critical part would be ensuring you have a bold enough font to be read and proper color contrast to make those easy to read. And I'm going to grab the share screen, and this is a great segue into our contrast checker tool, which is an external tool that can be used to double check any colors, selections, and color palettes you're building. And Summer, would you be able to drop that in the chat, the link to that, just for folks?
Yep.
Thanks, because I've since lost my chat with my share screen. So this is the WebAIM color contrast checker, and WebAIM is a website and an organization that is dedicated to web accessibility. So when we're working in PowerPoint or PDF, and probably some of the other Adobe Creative products where we're designing graphics and we're maybe doing flyers and handouts, and even in face-to-face presentations, we want color contrast to be suitable for somebody to see it from the back of the room or in, you know, wonky lighting. We all know we've gone to buildings where we got to like see things we didn't expect in person and the lighting on your projector isn't great or something. So to be able to check contrast, you would grab your foreground color, and I'm just going to put in the University Scarlet because I remember the color codes. So this is the brand Scarlet, and you can use the hex codes by copying and pasting, or you can type in the color values with the red, green, blue. So you'll see that the Scarlet passes most digital accessibility standards with a contrast ratio of 6.74 to 1. So the WCAG standards is basically the digital accessibility standards that we are expected to meet. The accessibility standards vary from the AA to the AAA. We must meet the AA. AAA is ideal. And the nice part about this is you don't have to remember what counts as normal text and large text because it will explain all of this on the WebAIM color contrast checker. So it takes a little bit of time to do this, but what I recommend you do is as you start working with a slide deck, take some time up front to pick your color palette, and then you can save those color combinations and create kind of a standing list of things that pass this contrast checker. So the darker grays in the brand color palette tend to pass this. I will say the lighter grays often do not pass this, so you do need to be careful with the grays in the university color palette. So you can also tinker with the background. So I can't remember all the color palettes, but if we start moving this into, I don't know, some sort of like dark gray that might appear on the university color palette, you'll see we can't put scarlet on a gray necessarily. We've got to be really careful with that gray because this fails everything. So that's kind of how the contrast checker works. Before I leave, I'm going to try to check the chat. Oh, that's just the link that Summer dropped. So I'm going to reshare the PowerPoint deck, and we're going to go back to talking about some of the other things we can be doing in PowerPoint to create accessible content. Summer was just working with the colors and the charts, and here's Accessibility Cat. I'm gonna squish Accessibility Cat over here for my next item. Whoa, sorry Cat, messed up your aspect ratio there. You look a little squashed. All right. So go ahead, Summer.
I was gonna say, before you move on, if we are talking about the colors in those pie charts, I just checked those on the WebAIM myself, and those colors do not seem to pass, even though to my eyes they're definitely high contrast. So that's why it's important to check those sort of things, because depending on, I think someone mentioned last week, the color saturation, they might not be high enough contrast. Sorry, Amy.
No, that's great. Thank you. I think that's really important. Some of us that work in a design space a lot are really in tune and can see a lot of definition between colors. So it might surprise you what does and does not pass, which is why we want to check every color palette and why it's so efficient to save them once you've checked them, so you don't have to check them every single time. So another easy way to improve accessibility in your PowerPoint decks is to use the built-in list functions. And I'm going to just drop a text box in here. And you can do this in PowerPoint. When you drop a text box in PowerPoint, it will show up in the screen reader. You can't just drop text boxes wherever in Word and get the same effect. So I dropped a text box, and I'm going to go find my list function. So by using these bulleted lists, it will help tag the item or the list as a list. And I'm feeling really uncreative here right now. But anyway, so this is what's considered an unordered list. And these are generally recommended if you are using a list where order does not matter. So this would be like, pack these things in your suitcase for 4-H camp. Order doesn't really matter, right? So you've got, sunscreen and a hat or whatever, and you would put these in a bulleted list. Using the built-in list function from the text editor tools will help tag this as a list appropriately, instead of doing something like putting a star and then typing the item. You don't want to do that. It won't tag it as a list. Now, where you might want to use a numbered list, would be if order does matter, you would use the numbered list buttons. So ordered lists are good for if the number matters. And then also from a design standpoint, like if you're doing, let's say you're doing a handout for some farmers and it's like the top 5 ways to prevent such and such disease in your soybeans, then the number is going to matter because you said there were 5 ways. So there might be some instances where number matters from an instructional design and alignment standpoint. So just think about that as you use these list types. But these will tag the items in your slides accordingly and help a screen reader read out to a person who's using it that this is an unordered list. And then it'll read the list items. Or if it's a list that goes 1, 2, 3, and then it will say ordered list and it will read the items in order. It gives a person relying on a screen reader better context of the structure. So that's why these tags are so important, because if you just do lines, it'll say paragraph line or body text line and it'll read it, but it doesn't give someone who needs a little more context of the structure. So that's why the lists are so important. And then we'll move along and talk more about images since we've got our accessibility cat here. So one of the things about images is that we always want to make sure that the images are either given appropriate alternative text, which we often refer to as alt text. And what that is text that a screen reader will read out about the image for a person who needs the screen reader and may not be able to see the image. So this way it would say, it would read out whatever's in the description. So in my PC, I'm right-clicking over the image, and in this drop-down menu, the option to edit alt text appears. And now I've got to move my video pod because it's covering up my pane. Hopefully everybody can see my alt text editor pane now.
Yep.
Let's see if I can make it a bit bigger. So this image did come with some pre-created alternative text, although I don't think it's very helpful. So it's also worth checking these manually. This is one thing to be aware of later when we show you the accessibility checker. It will not show you this because it has alternative text and it won't ask you to check it. So you'll want to manually check these to the best of your ability. So I don't particularly think a picture containing cat, domestic cat, and mammal indoor is helpful. So I'm going to delete that and change it to fluffy cat wearing a vest using a computer. I like to add a little bit of character about the picture to kind of give the feel, right? But at the same time, the recommendations for alternative text are no more than a line or 2. So if you find that the alternative text is getting very long, that's when we recommend using a caption or a more paragraph-like description to go with that image. And again, when there's particularly complex messages going on in an image, it's better for all users to be able to provide that description in a caption or something as well. Because, you know, when you show someone who's not used to looking at bar charts, a bar chart or a particularly complex graph, they may not quite know what they're looking at. So a caption would be helpful for those folks to, you know, highlight what they're looking at and then provide kind of the take-home message. Summer, if there's anything relevant popping up in the chat that I need to address, you can just cut in.
It's just a question about screen readers, which I'm not totally sure about it. Whitney asked, can screen readers read Zoom chats and polls? And my assumption is that because it's approved by the university, that would be true, but it's always dangerous to assume.
I am not well versed in the polls. So that is why we have this live transcription feature rolling. The screen reader would be able to read that saved transcript. Since we have the audio feed going, I'm not sure a screen reader would like simultaneously, just from some usability perspectives. I don't know if anybody be trying to use that live, but the transcripts are readable by a screen reader, but the polls I'm not sure about. I would have to investigate the accessibility features of the polls. The other thing that could be useful as well is if you need a transcript for an image and it's purely for the sake of a screen reader and you don't think you want it on the slide for the sighted users who are not using a screen reader, you can kind of type up, I'll plop another text box in here, you know, type a long description and as a content item, and then again, move it off screen. My mouse doesn't particularly seem to like this right now, but you can move that description kind of off screen. And then you could, essentially kind of hide it from your formatting, but keep it there for a functional purpose with a screen reader. So let's try to make accessibility cat bigger again. Okay, so that's kind of all the stuff I had lined up for images, and you do want to make sure that you consider the images in the reading order as well. And I see more stuff flying in the chat. So
yeah, I'm responding.
Okay, cool. So we'll go on to talk about tables, and I'm going to drop a new slide in here just to be able to plop a table on it. And again, so I'm going to grab a pre-made slide layout. And so this is a content slide. And when you use those pre-made layouts, they really help with the reading order and with the tags. And so I'm actually going to click insert a table. And so when you insert a table, the important piece to remember is that we want tables to be used only when tables are absolutely necessary. Try to avoid tables for formatting. Keep the tables for data when a table is truly warranted. And it's interesting too, in the data viz world, they also recommend reserving tables for when you can do almost nothing else with it. Other things are better than tables if we can help it. Now, if you must use a table, keep it simple, avoid merging cells because that can make it tricky for screen readers to get through them. And be sure that you have the header row selected, which is found in the upper left-hand corner of the tools in PowerPoint. There's this checkbox. It's pretty much always there by default, but you'll want to mark it. And then you can also mark the column, like the first column, like let's say the first column has some static information in it that doesn't really change. You'll want to mark the first column. And that kind of helps the screen reader advance through. And you'll also want to be careful with your color choices again. You'll see with this gray, light gray, that I might need to use like a black text on top of this. And that header row has a really dark header row. I might consider putting white on top of that or something. So keep in mind that the color contrast considerations continue. And you can sort of check how the table functions by using the tab key on your keyboard to kind of flip through it and make sure it goes how you expect it to read. And again, try to avoid the split, merged, or nested cells. They get pretty tricky for screen readers. And then the next piece we wanted to talk about is animations. And animations I don't think are used as frequently as they used to be. When PowerPoint really became a thing, there were animations all over the place. If you are going to use animations for a visual purpose, be sure to keep those animations simple and consistent, and avoid anything with too much flickering or flashing lights. There are some safety considerations for individuals with certain conditions with like how many times a light flickers, and I've never really investigated them, but if you find a transition that flickers or flashes a lot, I would just avoid it.
Amy,
Yep.
Anne said, I didn't catch what you added to the first cell. I also didn't catch it because I was looking at the chat.
Okay. So depending on the structure of a table, you might find that it would be helpful for a screen reader to be aware that this is the first column of a table. And you might want to mark it as so in the table, and that will help the screen reader kind of read out to the individual who's consuming the content where they're at in the table. Be sure to absolutely always mark your header row, so it can read that out for folks as a header row. So those are the two main things with the first column and the first row on a table, to make sure that your table is set up to be successfully read out by a screen reader. Does that help?
Yeah, and I pointed out that those functions are a little bit small, but they're in the top left-hand corner of the screen.
Yes, I may have mixed up my right and my left because I have not had enough coffee today. They are in the top left-hand corner of the screen, and they are that way for both Mac and PC. So all these things that I'm showing you on PC, we are just showing you so that way we're moving along, and we'll switch between machines when it's relevant. So we talked about animations and transitions. Just be careful of flickering and flashing lights and be consistent. And moving along with the audio and video, some of you had talked about using PowerPoint for video. If you are using PowerPoint for video, you'll want to make sure to provide a transcript of that video when it's posted. We generally recommend that any videos you create in PowerPoint be moved to a video player. So that would be something like MediaSite and YouTube, which is outside the scope for today, but do come next week if you need and want to learn more about accessible video. We'll talk about that more in depth, because all videos are required to have closed captions and you're required to post a transcript. So we'll cover that in more detail next week. Summer, is there anything else high level for the audio video situation I should cover now? I'm not thinking of anything.
I do not think so.
Okay.
I do want to address a question that I think is relevant that Dominique asked. I was just typing, but I think this is a good transition. She asked, when using PowerPoints for courses in Carmen Canvas or Scarlet Canvas, there's such a limited storage space to hold the PowerPoints for the entire semester, and they have to be saved as PDFs. And she asked how much of the accessibility content gets saved when you export as PDF. And I just wanted to say that's an awesome question and very relevant. And when you're building either a Word document or a PowerPoint slide deck with accessibility in mind in the first place and following these practices, for the most part, these types of considerations in the structure and titles transfer over when you convert to PDF, including alternative text, but you just want to double check any PDF that PowerPoint that you convert to PDF to double check and make sure, but it's always easy to make those PDFs more accessible if you've built the PowerPoint or Word document to be accessible in the first place.
Thanks, Summer. Yeah, that is exactly right, and great question, Dominique. Let's actually get into some of these settings that we adjust and tinker with to make sure that they move to PDF appropriately. That's actually a great time to be asking that question. So now I saw a couple mentions in the chat of the actual accessibility tools themselves, which we use sort of at the tail end of producing digital accessible content. So you go to the review tab, and this is the same on Mac and PC. Where we get into a little bit of a difference, I'll note in a minute. So under the review tab is this check accessibility tool. And you'll notice we've got a few issues in the right pane after I click check accessibility. So there's some missing alternative text on a content placeholder. And so this is a chart that needs some alt text added. And if you right click in the correct area, you click closer to the title of the chart, you have to get off the data series. So right click and then you can edit alt text, and you can type out what the pie chart shows, and you'll want to include like the title and then you would include like Q1 would be 72% according to this. You know, and so you want to make sure to indicate exactly what's in that chart. And if it gets too long, that's when we recommend a transcript or a caption. If this happened to be something that was purely decorative, you can click this little square to mark it as decorative. Once that's done, I can close that and go back to the accessibility pane, where it also has different issues to correct. For the sake of time, I'm going to show you this default section name. It's going to take me here, and we can fix this default section name by clicking on the little caret to open up this menu, rename the section. And so we could rename this as section, you know, it's got to be relevant and meaningful. So this would be digital accessibility PowerPoint intro maybe. So that's the thing, is we've got to also make sure that whatever we rename a section as is it's meaningful, and you don't just call it section 1, because if someone's relying on a screen reader and it reads out section 1, well, section 1 of what? So we want to make sure we have adequate context. And then this is where we talk about reading order. There's some warnings here. It just wants you to manually check the reading order on the slide. So I open this up, click on slide 1, and open up the verify object order. And you'll see that we actually must have created these items separately. So you want your reading order to be top down. So the first item on the list is what's going to be read first. And right now, the way this is listed, the title will be read second. So that's not particularly helpful. So we want to move that up to the first item in the list, and then it'll read the subtitle with me and Summer's names, which is how we would want that to read. And then one thing that's a little bit different in PC, and Summer will show you on Mac, is if an item is decorative. And it's interesting they don't have the supporting text here. But if an item is decorative, you uncheck this box and it will tag that item as decorative and take it off the list for a screen reader. A screen reader will not read out a decorative item, but we want the screen reader to read that. So that's how we edit the reading order. And you can do that also by selecting a slide and then using this reading order panel button at the top of the screen. And in Mac, it's called something else, Selection Pane. And so Summer will showcase that momentarily. And again, you just drag and drop your items where you want them in the list and uncheck items that need to be decorative. At this point, Summer, do you want to take over and show the reading order full selection pane in Mac and how to do that in a Mac? Summer, you're muted.
Yeah, and there was another question that pointed out a difference between, let me do a new share because I'm only sharing. I was only sharing the PowerPoint. Now I'm sharing my screen. I don't have that accessibility tab on my Mac. I think there may be a way to add a tab for accessibility, but the way I go to find the accessibility checker is under review and check accessibility. You can also go to under tools at the top of the screen. So I'm going to go to review, check accessibility, and mine looks a little bit different, but it still shows up on the right-hand side of the screen. I don't have those check boxes for in the reading order pane. So this is my selection pane right here. Still under accessibility. Oh, accessibility tab popped up. That's how you get it. In the selection pane, it shows me my slide contents in order. And as you can see, these are out of order. I can drag and drop to move those around and decide which order I want things to be read. But on Amy's PC, there is a checkbox where you can say that I want this to be decorative or not decorative. I don't have that same function in Mac, but I can still right click and edit the alt text and mark that as that item as decorative or not decorative. If I go back to check accessibility, it looks very similar. I don't think there are any other major differences other than the reading order pane. In PC, it's called the selection pane in a Mac. So if I was going to go to home, I just want to demonstrate it one more time. I'm going to cross all these things out. If I want to check the accessibility, I will go to review, the top tab, review, check accessibility. I can also use this drop down to check accessibility, alt text, or click selection pane if I just want to reorder the contents of each of my slides. I think those were the main differences, Amy, unless you can think of anything else.
Those were the main differences. The final steps to convert to a PDF is usually best to actually open an Acrobat and then create from a file.
Mm-hmm. I can pull that
up. Whitney asked, is there a button to automatically organize the slide content? I noticed on a PowerPoint I have pulled up, everything is scattered. So if it's a populated PowerPoint, Whitney, it might be sometimes PowerPoint shifts between machines and versions, especially across Windows and Mac. And the best way to kind of keep your content all in a line is to use the pre-built layouts. But again, that's like from a blank PowerPoint. I don't know if there's any way to really freeze the content in a populated PowerPoint. It's pretty responsive. And I think that's probably why so many of us convert to PDF often, is to lock in that content. And so if you do convert to PDF, I encourage you to watch last week's recording if you have not. And we also have some other resources from Adobe Acrobat to show you how to be successful in making accessible PDF files as well.
Right. And just to, since we have a few minutes, I will go ahead and show you how to at least convert your PDF to, convert your PowerPoint slides to PDF. And then that other video that we'll hopefully have out by Friday, it goes into a little bit more depth about making the PDF accessible after you've converted. So once I'm in my PDF, Amy, can you see that on my screen?
Yes.
Okay, so I'm sharing my whole screen. You are going to want to go to, can you see at the top of my screen where I have file?
Yep, we got the magical drop down menu. We're good.
Okay, open. Well, so you can go to file, open, and then or open. Well, maybe I could be wrong here. What am I missing?
Isn't it file and then like create?
Oh, create. Oh,
And the process looks pretty similar from Mac
yeah.
to PC. So we'll just show it here from Summer's computer.
File, create. That's my mistake. And then PDF from file. And then you'll be able to select your PowerPoint file wherever you have it saved on your device or in the cloud. Open. Maybe.
Accessibility cat picture must be big.
It must be big. My machine's also like running pretty hard right now too, for some reason. There we go. So it looks like it changed the fonts too, or a default font. So now I have that in PDF, and just out of curiosity, I'm going to check the accessibility and see how bad it is. We didn't change everything in here yet, so.
No, and I think you have to, it prompts you to save the document and then it'll let you run the accessibility check because
right.
it doesn't recognize it as a PDF just yet.
You're right. I think yours on a PC, it won't let you convert to PDF while the document is still open.
Yeah, it also won't let you do that.
On mine, it will let me. So that's another difference.
Anne asked a great question. Is this recommended if you're including a slide set in Canvas course as a resource? So I think you need to know your audience. The value of PDF is that if folks don't have access to PowerPoint, they can still access the PDF. So PDF is a little more accessible to folks who don't have software licenses. It's also a little bit more stable across devices. Whatever resources you're sharing do need to be accessible. So whether you make your PowerPoint deck accessible or you change it to PDF and then make the PDF accessible as well. You can go either route, but I would just know your audience. And yeah, great question, Dominique. Like Summer said, you can also use the export to PowerPoint or export to PDF function. There's also like a save as Adobe PDF function. By opening the file in Acrobat to save it, it was the same across devices, but you can save as PDF. I encourage you to experiment with that in your own on your own machines, because I've noticed some differences in how well the accessibility tags and alt text and those accessibility features stick. So if you have a couple different ways to save a PDF file, I encourage you to experiment with that and then pick the one that keeps the most of your accessibility modifications that you make to reading order, alt text, that sort of thing. It is a little disheartening and certainly inefficient if you have to go redo them all in PDF after you've done them in PowerPoint. And I think it's also important to consider too, you know, this makes us be mindful of the content we're creating up front. You know, we don't need to get carried away with 100 PowerPoint slides. Do we really need 100 PowerPoint slides? Can we get away with maybe 30? So I think this encourages us to be mindful across several areas of content development. And Summer's just dropped the resources in the chat there for everybody. We'll have this recording saved, and we'll edit the closed captions for accuracy and distribute that. This is, again, usable across all sorts of applications of PowerPoint. So we encourage you to keep learning, keep exploring. We're always learning more. So thanks for attending today. We'll stay on the line a few minutes longer if you have questions. Otherwise, we really appreciate you making the time to learn how to make your own digitally accessible content.
Yeah, thank you, everybody.